Hello, and welcome to Sparks. I'm Monica Harris, the Executive Director of RAILS, the Reaching Across Illinois Library System. This is the 44th episode of our podcast series. RAILS developed this podcast to spark conversations about important library trends and issues. Very excited to introduce our topic today, which is open educational resources, more commonly referred to as OER. We're talking with Dan Matthews, Cataloging and Digital Services Librarian at Moraine Valley Community College. Dan is also the current president of the Illinois Association of College and Research Libraries Forum through June 30th, 2023. Welcome, Dan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm so glad to have you here. Before we get started in talking about OER, we like to start out the podcast with a more general question. So I'm wondering, what are you currently reading?
So I usually try to keep two things going. So a more serious read, and then usually some like YA or easy reads. So right now, the things that are like next to my couch are No More Police by Miriam Kaba and Andrea J. Ritchie. And my fun read is The Dark is Rising sequence by Susan Cooper.
Oh gosh, I haven't read those in forever. That's wonderful. Are you revisiting them, or is that a new read for you?
Yeah, I'm revisiting. So I read these back in junior high and spent most of my 20s being like, I remember reading these books and these kinds of things happened. And then my coworker Tish Hayes was like, oh, they made a podcast of this book that I read once. And she was describing it. And I was like, that's the book. That's the book I've been looking for the last 10 years. And it was exactly right. So I've been going through it, and it's been a good like summer read for sure.
Oh, I bet. I mean, how fun to revisit something from when you were like a totally different person and get to see those changes. That's fascinating. I think that's really inspirational to me. Maybe I'll try and do something really similar. Well, we brought you here today to talk a little bit about OER. So I wondered if you could tell us, in your own words, what exactly are OER?
Sure. So to me, open educational resources are kind of a broad swath of educational materials. So anything from like a textbook, a slide deck, a syllabus, an assignment for a class, all of those kinds of things count. The big thing is that they are openly licensed so that everyone has access to them in a permanent way and in a way that is free. So there are some restrictions to how some of those things work, but by and large, there are things for class that are free for students to access and have and keep for themselves, and there are materials that are free for faculty members to take on and use for their classes, to edit in a way that makes sense for them for their classes, and for them to publish and create materials in a way that other classes could then use as well. So that's kind of how I think about them in the broadest terms.
I think that's a great definition. And so you did mention that they're free. I assume that that is obviously a big benefit to OERs, but could you say a little bit more about why and what the current environment is for students?
Sure. Textbook costs are through the roof. It's just incredibly expensive to purchase textbooks and materials. And there's a landscape that is changing with textbooks as well. So we're seeing a lot of digital materials, which provide many benefits for students, but we're also seeing like digital suites of products that students are purchasing. So OER provides, again, so one of the other big things, aside from being free, are that they provide students with perpetual access to the materials. And so with these digital materials, there's often licensing agreements that their access to these materials might end at the end of the semester. So should a student need to withdraw or take a class again, they would have to pay again for that book. And an OER or a physical book even would allow them to have access to those materials, in perpetuity. So there's a lot of kinds of access benefits for students as well. For faculty members, it's an opportunity for them to customize the materials for their classes too. So a faculty member could get in, and if they didn't like the way that the chapters were ordered, for instance, in a book, they could reorder all of the chapters to fit their syllabus and give students a reading that goes exactly through how they want the materials to be presented in their class. So it gives faculty members the opportunity to tailor their materials to their class, which is pretty unique.
Yeah, that's incredible. I hadn't really thought about that particular benefit to faculty as well as to students, obviously, but that seems like as you're designing a syllabus, gives you real opportunity to make it your own in that way. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, are there challenges in using OER in addition to some of these benefits that you have highlighted?
Um, the bias in me is like, no. But of course, there are always challenges with anything that's new. And I think particularly with OER, we are in a growth kind of stage with OER at large. And so there are infrastructures that exist, but that are growing and are having some growing pains in some instances. There's not always open educational materials that exist for every topic. So faculty members may, take their first steps into finding materials for their course and find that there's maybe one book that they don't like very much, or that there aren't materials yet for the class that they're teaching. And so there are a couple of barriers, I think, to entry for some people, but there are a lot of materials that do exist already. So I think it's worth investigating and taking those initial steps and seeing, and collaborating with the librarian, of course, to just make sure that you're looking in all the right spots to find the things that you're looking for. And I guess I would say that's maybe another barrier, is that there are so many different places to look, and there is like a wealth of materials that exist, and it can be overwhelming to just kind of jump in without any guidance or assistance at the very beginning.
It's like anything with information, like having that additional guide to help you find exactly what it is that you need is always going to benefit you to getting where you need to go.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
that makes a lot of sense to me. Well, can you tell us a little bit about how you use OER at your community college?
Sure. We have a number of faculty that are kind of working with their individual courses. And so we have a faculty member that has created a Google site for their class. So this faculty member presents all of the information for the course through a Google site. It's all information that is readily available either on the internet or is openly licensed. So things like they link out to like a YouTube video, which is not necessarily an OER, but they've created this piece that is largely an OER that has access to links that materials that are out on the internet, and also things that are openly licensed together. So they've this faculty member has created all of this package together via Google Sites. We have another faculty member that's created a history course through a number of different openly licensed readings, and they've created more of a traditional textbook for their class, just from some articles and some primary sources for their students that are openly licensed and available, and they've put all those together in the reading that they offer for their students. So here at Moraine Valley, it's something that is growing. We're in that growth phase, so we don't have a ton of adoption. Of course, I'm forgetting the big one. We have had this kind of huge success with our biology department. So they've all collaborated and created an entire class. So all sections of this class will use the OpenStax textbook for their class. And I'm blanking on exactly which topic it is, but it's one of the biology classes. And so in this moment, I'm going to forget it. But the remarkable piece of the story is that the entire department has collaborated and said, yes, we're all going to agree to adopt this for this one class. And so they each are making their own syllabi for the class, but they're committed to using this book. So every student that comes through and takes this class is going to have no textbook costs associated with that class, which is really cool.
No, I think that's perfect because it leads to my next question, which is like, how have students reacted to some of these, scenarios that you have shared at your school?
Yeah, students by and large are always happy to receive things for free and to not pay for textbooks. So we did a survey about 2 years ago, and we were seeing students reporting that textbooks are a barrier. So on our campus, we were seeing when textbooks cost more than $50, they are finding that to cause them a financial barrier to taking their classes even. And some students have opted to take fewer courses. Some students have opted to shift to a different program just because the classes within that program, the textbook costs were too much, and they weren't able to afford to stay in a program. So we're seeing students definitely report that the costs are inhibitive. And when they're talking about classes in which they've received items for free, all of the responses for things with an OER or with open materials or free materials that aren't necessarily open, students are saying they got a lot more out of the class. They're doing better in those classes. So there's some really remarkable things that students are saying about their experiences with OER, and all of them have been positive. So it's been really good to see.
Well, it's so good to hear that both you have positive reaction from students as well as the kind of collaborative work you're talking about in your biology department, where faculty can work together to create something that works,
Yeah.
for them. Is it are OER only used at the college level, or are there instances of OER also being used in the K through 12 environment?
There, I'm not as familiar with the materials that are for a K through 12, but I know that they do exist. And so there's a broad spectrum of materials that exist for various levels. So if you are looking at some of the math textbooks through OpenStax, there's algebra, geometry, pre-algebra, and a lot of those textbooks might be appropriate at a high school level as well. And I know that we are seeing kind of an uptick in some of the K through 12 materials as well. So some open readings, some open assignments, some open kinds of programming for the K through 12 area. I know that that is growing, but I would say it's probably not as prominent as some of the higher ed materials.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have advice for an educational institution that's just getting started with OER right now?
Hang in there. Um, so again, it can be overwhelming to kind of introduce this to faculty. There's a lot, and it can feel like there's not a lot of support as they're embarking on selecting open educational materials. So for example, with a publisher is going to call and say, hey, we've got these materials for you. Here's all of their benefits. Here's what we know. Let me, I'm a resource for you, and I'll help you, decide to purchase these materials, right? And so they'll send them a free copy and things like that. And that doesn't always exist for everybody that's going to start taking on open educational materials. So being like a librarian or somebody who is interested in advocating for OER on your campus, just be aware that people will need a little bit of support and guidance as they get started. It's not necessarily OER versus a publishers in every instance, but publishers have a lot of resources at their disposal to kind of sell their products. And we have to compete with that on some level, at least in the way of providing some support and providing some service to our faculty members by collecting materials for them, talking them through the processes, and making the options manageable in a lot of ways. So just helping people kind of narrow the scope of things that are going to work for them. So that kind of thing, I think, is really crucial to getting people on board and feeling confident in getting started.
Well, it sounds like it's a big world, so there's a lot that you have to be able to take in and synthesize before you're able to just move.
Yeah, and the conversations around copyright are always a little scary because it's legal conversation. And so we hear a lot of things about cease and desist orders and takedowns and things like that. And it can be really scary for a faculty member to feel like they're going to be taking on something that potentially they're going to mess up in some way and then get in trouble or get the college in trouble. And I think as somebody who's advocating, by and large, the materials that you're finding that are open educational resources are going to be like a plug and play kind of situation. The materials are open and ready, and you can provide a link to them to your students immediately. So there's, while those copyright concerns I think are serious and valid, a lot of the content and a lot of the things that people are going to be providing to their faculty members are going to be of the copyright of the Creative Commons licensing that's going to make sure that people are doing okay, and they're providing legal and safe materials that their students can use and print and copy and keep. Yeah.
Well, and there's advocates and people like you, Dan, who are able to give some of this kind of guidance to people who are getting started. So thank you for sharing this, because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering the same thing. Like, they're interested in this, don't really know how to take that first step. So I think it's really valuable that you shared that with our audience. Thank you. Well, thinking big picture now about the future of OER, what do you see as where OER is going, and what you think the future for open educational resources really is?
I think we're going to see it grow a lot. I think we're going to see a kind of a big uptick in adoption, especially in Illinois. There's a lot of really cool programs that are happening. So Carly, the Consortium for Academic and Research Libraries of Illinois, they have an OER committee that I've participated on. And they've done a lot of programming. So a lot of that kind of intro programming that I mentioned, they're providing that for librarians and for faculty members. So they're kind of working both sides of that intro content. They're also creating some infrastructure. So they've created the Open Illinois Hub, where institutions can upload and share the OER content that they're using, the OER content that they are creating, and bringing some awareness to these materials, especially the ones that are created in Illinois. So I think that's really great. And it's a great infrastructure to kind of collaborate. So for instance, College of DuPage has just recently made a couple of education textbooks. And so they took some open materials, created their textbook, and then made sure that all of the policies and standards in those educational textbooks met Illinois standards and policies. So they were able to take that and make that a material that can be broadly applicable to all of the education programs in Illinois. So I think we're going to see kind of this uptick in adoption and being able to collaborate with each other through some of these kinds of like informational and awareness efforts, and through some of the infrastructure that's kind of being built. And I think we're seeing this also through Carly, the Consortium for Academic and Research Libraries of Illinois, through their SCORES grant. So the support for the creation of open educational resources, SCORES. And they're seeing colleges and universities collaborate together in creating some of these open educational materials. And we're seeing a lot of institutions create these materials kind of with an eye to making sure that it is something that is accessible and applicable to programs outside of their own. So we're seeing people think about creating stuff that other colleges can adopt. So it's you tell a friend, they tell their three friends, they tell their three friends, that kind of scheme, we'll call it. But we're seeing people make things with that perspective of this should be something that everybody should have access to and can share, and then can make their own version of and make it tailored to exactly how they want their classes to go. So a lot of the stuff that Carly has been doing has been really kind of incredible. So it's very cool to see. Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because we've been really excited to see the lead that Carly has taken on some of these issues, and have been excited to be able to support them in some of their efforts. So yes, definitely something for our listeners. If you're not familiar, with some of these grants and pieces that Carly's working on in OER, and you're interested in learning more, it's a wonderful organization to look at when you're trying to learn more about OER as well.
Very much so. And we're seeing IACRL has taken on an Open Educational Resources Award, and they've just had their first batch of awardees go out this spring, which is really exciting to see that there were enough people to apply. And we have these 5 awards that we can give out. People are interested, and people are looking for ways to kind of get into open educational resources. And things like the SCORES grant, things like the IACRL, the OER Kickstart Award, they provide a certain amount of legitimacy that people can bring to their deans, to their boards, to their administration, and say, people out here are doing this, and we can get money for our campus. And there's all of the prestige that's wrapped up in academia as well. And so getting awards and getting funding to get started, I think, is a really important piece. And so we're seeing that kind of thing start to take hold. And that's really exciting, just because that's part of the infrastructure that I think will be really critical in making it a standard part of higher ed in Illinois, for sure.
It is exciting, and I can hear the excitement in your voice when you talk about it, which is really great. Is there anything else about OER that you want to make sure that listeners of today's podcast understand, or anything else that you think they should know?
I think by and large, if you are somebody listening to the podcast that is just getting started, I will just reiterate, it can feel overwhelming. There are people around and networks that exist already of people that will help you get started. So if you are a librarian or another OER advocate, reach out to people. You can reach out to me. There are people at IACRL, there are people at Carly, there are other networks around the state of people that are doing this kind of work. And everybody that I've had the pleasure of working with and talking to about this has been biting at the chance to talk about what they're doing and are really excited about sharing with people the benefits that OER are bringing to their students and to their faculty, and to like demystifying the process of getting people involved. So do not suffer in silence. Reach out, make contact. I wouldn't cold call anybody, but I would send a cold email. So just reach out to the people that you maybe are seeing or know of that are doing OER work. And everybody is willing to help out and get people started. So don't hesitate if you're one of those people that's like, I'm not sure exactly how to get started. Somebody's going to be willing to sit down and chat with you about it for sure.
Yeah, it's such a great opportunity for people to learn more and get excited about something that I think is going to be something that we all need to know about more in the future of libraries. So your enthusiasm is infectious. Thank you, Dan, so much for being here with us today to tell us more about open educational resources and how they affect libraries. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you very much for listening to Sparks today. Sparks is produced by the Reaching Across Illinois Library System. If you would like to learn more about the show or share your feedback on the topics discussed, please visit railslibraries.org/sparks.